So it's a great pleasure to welcome our first speaker of this session. We're just going to have two speakers today in the current session. So the first is Isabel Grimm-Stadelmann from the Elliptic Munich, who is going to talk to us about the medical collection of the Codex Sofiensis Tracos 148a.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, for the introduction. And let me start with a very warm thanks to the organizers for having me here, for inviting me, and for having this fantastic idea of bringing all of us together every year here in Łódź. So today is a great pleasure that I can share with you some very recent found I did in the National Library of Sofia in Bulgaria last autumn. And it is my great pleasure to thank very warmly Ivan Bilyarsky from the University and Academy, Bulgarian Academy of Sofia, for making the contact to the National Library, and there I worked together with Elizaveta Musakova, who helped me a great deal and who also told me a lot of things about this manuscript, about this fascinating manuscript, which is digitalized very beautifully under Diktyon 62252. You can find it in Pinakes. And this is where we start. It is, as I've told you, kept in the National Library of Sofia, the library Kirill I Methodi, and it's hosted there under the number Codex Grecus 148a, and maybe it could be dated to the middle of 17th century, but it should be earlier, but we will see further. It looks like this, and it is very briefly described by Aksenia Jurova in the catalog of this library, and there are two very brief notions about this manuscript, one in Bulgarian language by Marlena Dimova, and another one in Italian by Amneris Roselli. And this is the cover, but probably is not the first one, but a later one. And the general condition of this codex is very fragile and recently very carefully restored. During the restoration work, a lot of maculation was detected inside the binding, including some newspaper fragments being datable into 1853. And this is the terminus for the new binding and the maybe first refurbishment of the codex. Inside this cover, we can trace some dates written in blue pencil, and the one 1901 may be the date of the annotation, and 1626 is the date also mentioned on folio 1. I was very lucky because inside this cover, you see inside this bag here, I also could find, I was allowed to shake the codex a little bit and it fell out of it. I could find an ex libris which hints to the family Rodokanakis. Here is written Rodokanachi. And this is our famous family of Echios. We will come to this a little bit later. Oh no, we will come to this now because I inserted this slide. We have one famous Rodokanakos. It's Konstantinos Rodokanakis. He's the personal physician and court alchemist of King Charles II Stuart. And there is in London, West Norwood Cemetery, in the Greek Orthodox cemetery, is the family mausoleum. And Konstantinos Rhodokanakis, we know very well as a follower of Paracelsus with the iatrochemistry, and he created the Alexikakos, the spirit of salt, which is a very powerful universal remedy. And the only thing he does not tell us is how it is made of and how the recipe was going on. But because this is, of course, this is very quite an arcanum. So here we are with the family of Rhodokanakis, which contains not only this famous Konstantinos, but also two more physicians and one poetrist and one pharmacist. But we don't have any prenom, we just have the family ex libris Rhodokanaki. After the restoration, we can see that the Codex contains 14 quaternions with rebound thread stitching, and the text starts immediately with folio 1. Here is a preview with folio 1, and we have also detected some watermarks. One is a bunch of grapes. You can find in the databases, in the watermark databases, but this is a very strange combination of letters. I'm working still on it because you cannot find in any publication and in any watermark database. This is still a problem, these watermarks, and there are some watermarks with letter combinations dating in the middle of the 18th century, for example, connected with the name of Nicephorus of Rila, but this is too late for this manuscript, as we will be seeing very soon. So this is the first page, first folio. We have some datation. It's written Egrameno 1626, and it mentions the Ion Oros, the Arthos, and there is, as Elisaveta kindly told me, a legend connected with this manuscript that it was on the Arthos, and it was used by some Arsonic monks for some miraculous healing. But the hand is different from the main text scribe. Both are anonymous, and the content of this medical collection is based on writings, most probably reworked writings of one physician called Pieropoulos, and this physician we know very well in the context with the Xenon of the Graal and with the pupils of Johannes Argyropoulos. We have here various therapeutic formularies, and here he is written. It's Parontos Iatrisophio, Isablin, Dialectum, Kerfdoine, and this is very interesting because this is written in easy, understandable Greek, as it says, and he says it's about a very famous physician called Pieropoulos, and this is written here, of course, with a lot of italicism and orthographic variants. It contains also some excerpts from writings from the Corpus Hippocraticum, also from Galenic writings, and then from the third book of Paul of Aegina, from Dioscorides, and it also contains a kind of botanical lexicon and some illustrations, which are, as we will see very soon, which are quite strange. The sources are reworked and adapted to the copyist's need, and they are rooted in daily medical practice. This Iatrosophion is written in Ablo-Helleniki in corresponding to the reworking process, and it contains these mentioned manuscripts. We have one anonymous scribe, which is Manus A for the entire text, but annotated by at least two other different hands, and perhaps also another one, a later one, which uses this blue pencil and has a strong leftward tilt. Another scribe using strong rightwards tilt and using a kind of very thin pencil. Due to him is also an unnumbered folio at the very end of the codex, which is badly damaged at the edge and contains a list of selected recipes selected from this manuscript. And the same scribe has authored a recipe annotation dated 1866 in the lower free margin, as you can see here, of folio 2. And there are a lot of mixed in it. There are a lot of ointment recipes. One of them hints to transcultural cooperation because it's called the ointment of Mustafa Bey, which hints that it's a kind of transcultural mixture. We also have various pill prescriptions as well as instruction for healing plasters and poultices, emplastra, stomach prescription, and some prescriptions against arthrosis, against podagra, some choleria for eye diseases, dental prescriptions, and including also various formulas with Ottoman and Jewish provenance. The medicinal potions and juleps, sulapia, are also in this direction. The individual prescriptions are consecutively numbered in the margin, some in Greek, some in Latin, some double Greek-Latin. The chapters always start with emphasized and ornamented initial letters. Sometimes we have a no Greek numbering system where he sticks just to the Latin numbering, which continues continuously. And then he alters again with adding the Greek numbers. About this always mentioned Pyrrhopoulos, we know from this famous Oxfordian manuscript where we can see the Xenon of the Graal, and here sitting Johannes Argyropoulos being a teacher there. And we know from adscription here that the pupils of this Johannes Argyropoulos include also two brothers, Antonius and Manuel Pyrrhopoulos, which both were physicians, and the Sofiensis mentions not a first name anywhere. Rosselli points to several other people named Pyrrhopoulos in the 15th century milieu, some Andreas, some Alexius, but they were scribes and manuscript collectors and not physicians. Only Antonius and Manuel are mentioned in connection with Johannes Argyropoulos. And we have here a manuscript from Rome in the Bibliotheca Angelica, where we have also a subscription hinting to one of these Pyrrhopoulos brothers as the source of this list of therapeutic ingredients. This Iatrisophia, this medical collection, continues with different recipes. We have here also a hint to phlebotomy, and we have here also some kind of sample or Federprobe, which stops and is not continued further. It means for now and for all centuries is Ionas, and then it stops. Then we have an ornament followed by the title of an anonymous book about aching head and about problems with the head. And then we have on another page, which is very interesting, a kind of table containing some measurements and dosages, comparing the ancient ones with the modern ones, with the newer ones. Without any ornament, we have, apart from the Hippocratic writing following, and then on the next page we can see a drawing of Hippocrates himself with adscripted or Aihiatros Hippocrates, and the very funny detail is that he has some kind of Ottoman moustache drawn secondary. A very important place in this manuscript is dedicated to the plant Sideritis, which is on the first page of the illustrated part, directly below the Hippocrates. And we have on the next side the male and female Capnea plant, which is a kind of tobacco plant with a special focus on the roots of these plants. And this is what we have for all the illustrated part. We have a special focus on the roots. And maybe this focusation on the tobacco plants hints to some Thracian or Macedonian local connections, but I'm not sure yet. It's just work in progress. What is interesting is here the drawing of a hermit cell in a mountain surrounding, and it's written here Isopos. This is the name of this monk, and it is crossed out Makarios, the blessed one, and it is substituted with Legomenos, the so-called. And this is, I wanted to hint it to you because I think it's a very funny detail. So maybe the legend that this manuscript is connected with some Athonian miraculous healing is also triggered by this drawing, by this illustration. We have here another page which is very similar to an Italian parallel, which is discussed in detail by the Italian colleagues from Firenze. And this might hint in the direction that we have here some influences from Italian traditions of these kind of herbals with a focusation on the roots. We have here another page, and here we have a plant which is called Ichthyovotanon. It's the fish plant, and here we can see it with the plant and with the root being fish-shaped, and the same example of fish with a plant coming out of it we can find in a Hebrew manuscript. Shivan Gottlieb pointed out, and she says these kind of herbals are connected to some kind of iatroastrological or alchemical, but we are not sure. We've discussed it a little bit with Gerasimos, and about the alchemical impact we are not quite sure. And there are just 8 or 9 examples, Hebrew examples, and it must be a quite a interesting or quite a forceful Hebrew tradition, but I don't know that it is a Greek tradition anyway, because this is focusing on the root. I don't know as a real genuine Greek or Byzantine tradition. Here we have another page with a lot of interesting roots. This one is shaped like a dragon, like a snake, and it might be connected to this Greco-Egyptian Achnumis or Achnubis demon, which we can find very often in the gems. And then we have also some human heads also head under. And this is my special friend. This is a kind of wild pig, Agriogorono, who is eating a human leg. Why he does this, I don't know. And then we have, of course, Mandragora, and I'm now a little bit speeding on. And here we have a Ghana human head, and here we have a part from another tradition which might be go together with Nikolaos Myrepsos tradition. And here we have trilingual in Greek, Turkica, Turkish, and Romaica, Italian or Latin. And my question is now, can we put this together with some kind of iatrosophical Kombuyanitis, miraculous healing tradition, because we have a lot of Iatrosophia containing Christian iatromagical elements, and maybe with this ex libris the traces of one station of these manuscripts might lead to Chios. And with this, I may thank you very much for your interest and for going with me through this manuscript. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Alain, who is going to talk to us about Diels in the 21st century.
I thank Zosha for the technical part, the organizer, Professor Kokoschko, for the invitation, and let's say it looks like I am becoming a tradition here. So I was asked to intervene in this conference, and since last year I talk about pharmacy, Byzantium, etc. I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. And so Zosha diplomatically and very delicately pushed me, and I came up with something about the manuscripts. And so you'll tell me it has nothing to do with food and medicine, but you'll see we'll come to that. And you'll have food for thought, but also food from manuscripts. And so I have spent quite a bit of time in my life in trying to sort out what are the manuscripts of Greek medicine. And of course, you all know the so-called Diels, which is the Bible for ancient Greek medical manuscripts, compiled under the direction of the German classical philologist and historian of philosophy, Hermann Diels, mostly known for his Four Socratica. And so what is important here is that he became important player in the organization of science in Germany in that time. And so in 1901, he participated in the first meeting of the International Association of Academies. And there he met Johannes Heiberg, most known for the manuscript here, which is a palimpsest. And they together talked about the idea of creating a corpus of ancient Greek medical literature. And so they launched the program, which is now concretized by the Corpus Medicorum Graecorum in Berlin. And the basis of this program was, of course, an exhaustive inventory of the manuscripts. And so this is exactly what Diels coordinated. And here I have a summary of the method they followed to generate the Diels. And so they consulted all possible available catalogs of manuscript, printed catalogs. And what is important here is that they consulted them all. And you'll see that this will create a problem that I am trying to solve. And the result of that was the publication of the three items which I listed in the bottom of my slide: 1905, Galen and Hippocrates; 1906, this title, All the Other. And so this all the other is significant of their method. There is Galen and Hippocrates, and there are all the leftovers in a certain sense. And this is something I am working on. And then in 1907, the addenda and corrigenda. The important point here, which I want to make, is that their chronological time frame is from Hippocrates 5th century BC to the 7th century AD, which leaves out of the picture quite a number of texts. When I started working on that in the 1980s, the state of the art was here. The publication by Zienkiewicz, Toronto Pontifical Institute, and he compiled, just like Diels, all the catalogs of manuscripts, the catalogs available of that time, and he transformed that into lists which were published in what was at that time the most advanced way of communicating in microfiches. And so all the people of my generation, not the youngest one here, we have worked on this kind of instrument, which was extremely painful, but let's say it was very useful. This small microfiche in bluish, whatever color, this was the most advanced communication technology of that time. And so here you can still find that on the internet. So you see that it cost quite a bit of money, which was not exactly the price at that time in the publication in the 1980s. But the important point is that all this material here, you see the phrase in the website of Pinakes, all that material has been transferred to the Institute for Research of Medical Texts and Manuscripts at the CNRS, Institut d'Histoire et de Recherche des Textes. And Pinakes is exactly the transformation of Zienkiewicz, with the problems of Zienkiewicz, which means that because they've used all the catalogs, sometimes the information is duplicated. And so when you see the content of a manuscript, sometimes you see that you have from folio 90, and I'm thinking of a case, to folio 105, a text, and then below you see again from 90 to 105. And that comes from the fact that they've used all the catalogs, sometimes two catalogs for the same library. I took a different approach, which is first databasing the Diels. I've tabulated the entire Diels. And so this is a key because numbers don't lie. And a table doesn't lie at all, even less than numbers. And then after this first version on my computer, we put it on the web, on the website, our institute, and from here on, I'll talk plural, we, not plural majestatis, but plural of collaboration with Emanuela, who is there. Let's say she didn't suffer the first part of this research, but she has been involved from a certain point in this research. And so total in Diels, we have 1859 different shelf marks, which is, I want to show, don't correspond to that number of manuscripts. Here, what is important here, the division, corpus Hippocraticum, corpus Galenicum, and all the other, the rest, the leftovers. But what is significant is that once you have made this table, you see that all the other make almost half of what Diels identified, and Galen and Hippocrates, the second half. But again, you'll see that these numbers are temporary. And I have published about that in 2021, these 5 volumes, which I should have published earlier than that, but that's okay. What I did in the first volume, the one you have on the top left, I made a re-edition of the Diels. So here, on the left, you have a page of the Diels, and on the right, the way I published, I re-edited that in the first volume with a clearer layout of the page and a modern typography, because Diels is extremely useful, there is no doubt about that, but let's say the typography is quite, not confusing, but not totally clear. And so we agreed with the publisher that we should present it in a much more clearer layout and with a modern typography. And also in 2016, which I should have published after the 5 volume, which I just showed, I published this one, which is a book in which, in fact, there are 3 different books in one book, and I'll show you what are these 3 different books. And the first one is what we have here, which is an index of the Diels. On the basis of the tabulation, I have made the index of the Diels because there is no index at all in the Diels. And so with this material, we started a different approach. First, checking the information in Diels. So here, my table. We went in all the possible libraries in the world. Of course, the big libraries, you see here, the British Library, the National in Paris, and the Vatican Library, where we've been working, but we went also at the end of the world in the mountains in Greece, and so you see this huge monastery here, and here we are working on the manuscripts. We could have access to the whole collection, to the cabinet with the manuscript, and we could browse them one by one, and you'll see that on the table we have maybe 10 manuscripts with total liberty to check them. Here we are in a small church, 50 kilometers west of Thessaloniki. One manuscript in a church, there was an incredible cold, no space, and so with this small table, and I am with a Greek colleague, she was reading and I was transcribing on my computer. So we really saw everything everywhere. The results. So I returned to my 2016 publication. The result was examination of the information in Diels. And so you see on the left the page with something like Cat Metens, the Cathedral of Metens, and I have contacted everybody in the world. Nobody knew what this Metens referred to. In fact, it referred to the city, the French city of Metz. And there is no collection there. There are no Greek manuscripts. And so you see on the right my page from my 2016 book, how we came up with the identification of that manuscript, which of course has never been at Metz in France, and it's a confusion with another place. So we really double-checked all the information in the Diels. And so the result is the one I have summarized here. There are plain mistakes, period. There are duplicates because the Diels used all the catalogs of all the libraries, so sometimes two catalogs from the same library. There are identifiers which are not sufficient enough to identify any manuscript. There are Latin manuscript, Arabic manuscript, and manuscript without location. But also, even though they say that they've covered from the 5th century to the 7th century, there are papers of scholars, recent 19th century collations, and there are Iatrisophia, post 1453 manuscript. And so if we deduct all these manuscripts, which total 584, from the total of 1859, we have 1275 actual manuscripts in the Diels. And so here I return to my 5-volume things. And so in the first volume, the second on the right in the upper row, we have all the manuscripts about Hippocrates, and there we have distinguished the text of Hippocrates, and below the short line, the commentaries, Scholia and other things like that. So we have both the tradition of the text and the subsequent comments and rearrangement of the text. And in volume 5, tome 5, we have recreated the content of the full content of all the manuscripts. So this is some sort of first nucleus of what will be in the future a catalogue of the Greek medical manuscripts. So the new developments on that basis. We gain and we lose manuscripts. For example, this manuscript here, considered to be a manuscript of Actuarius, and so you see here there is a piece of Greek, but this is not a manuscript. It is written by hand, I agree, but that's not a manuscript. A manuscript is something else. And what I have found, this is in fact the reproduction by hand of a book which has been printed. And so you see here in the on the left the manuscript, supposed manuscript with the Greek text, which is in fact a reproduction by hand of the text that you have on the right in printing. So we lose that manuscript. On the other hand, for example, we recreate some manuscript. You have here a manuscript in Cambridge, supposed to be, according to Diels, Galenus de abortivo feritu. I have searched everything I can. I did not find any trace of any attestation of a treatise by Galen on that. I have analyzed the text and I've discovered that in fact it is a segment of the Ephodia. And in fact, this is one folio which has been cut off from a manuscript in Florence, and you have the reference here. And digitally, I have put this folio back into the manuscript where it originally was placed. And so here I've reconstructed the manuscript. So here, again, I lose a manuscript because I don't have a Cambridge manuscript, but I have a Florentine manuscript which is more complete. You all know this folio from the Sinai collection, a manuscript which is in fact in Arabic, but it's a palimpsest, and the level which has been cleaned is a reproduction of a plant which makes clear that there were illustrations like the ones in the Vindobonensis earlier than the Vindobonensis. So here we gain something. We have a manuscript of the 5th century, but we lose something. The Vindobonensis is not the most ancient illustrated copy of Dioscorides. And so I return to my 2016 book. I have already said that there are 3 books in it: the Index of Diels, the Correction of Diels, and 3 new manuscripts. I have updated the information or added new manuscript. And so you'll see here on the left the update, and on the right you'll see the information which is not in bold but in normal font are new manuscript which I introduced into the catalog. And this is how we have 3 books in one book. And so, starting with Diels, you remember my number of 1275 actual manuscripts. We have identified 1250 manuscripts, so almost as many as we have in Diels. And so we have a total relevant manuscript of 2525. so which means an increase almost by 100% compared with Diels. And already in 1991, when I started doing this kind of research, I projected something like 2200 manuscripts. So my projection at that time was quite correct because we are 25. And so I want to move from numbers to content, because you'll tell me, okay, that's nice, your numbers, but you don't tell us anything about the real manuscript, the content. We've created a table in which we store all the information about the manuscript, and this is the kind of information we are tracing. Among other, the watermarks. I am very fond of watermarks. I systematically check them in the whole manuscript. I don't check just some pages randomly, but I know by experience that you can have many watermarks in the same manuscript. So we check them all, and so you see the table here. And of course, you cannot read anything because it's so small, but believe me, we have all the fields that I have shown. But we also analyze the content of the manuscript, and this is where we come to the food, of course, and not only. Here, for example, I want to show the difference between the analysis that we do and the Diels. Here, in the upper part of the screen, you have what Diels says about the content of this manuscript, and in the lower part, what we do find in this manuscript. And we'll hear later on these days about Metrodora. So this is a key manuscript. On the basis of our work here, we table all these data, and we have different ways of doing it. So this is what I call a catalographic mode. So you'll see each row is about a manuscript and the content of the manuscript, but we can play with these tables and shift it to a new Diels, because that's where I'm going to, publishing a new Diels, of course. And so here you have it by alphabetical orders of authors. I've made a selection, random selection of 12 manuscripts. And so here is what we can come up with. You see for each author, we have the name and the title, and on the right, the identification of the manuscript and the folios. But we can tweak this table the other way around and recreating the content of each manuscript. So you'll see here, not the first line, but the next one, 1865, we have the content of the manuscript. So again, we are there at the catalog of the manuscript. And so doing this kind of stuff, we come up with the history of the tradition of the text, but also of the drugs. And we've talked about exotic drugs here. Here, the most ancient text I could find about Oriental drugs in Byzantium, which is not a medical text, if you want, in the traditional meaning of the definition of medical text, but it's letter here. And so you have the transcription of part of the text, and in bold, the terms of drugs, which are Oriental drugs, let's say, which is a manuscript in Genova. And this is a text which has technically nothing to do with medicine. Nevertheless, we have the drugs there, the substances, and this is the most ancient text I was able to find up to now about Oriental drugs in Constantinople, and you'll see this is mid-10th century, so that's very early. And this text here, which I have reproduced by hand, has been edited by Paul Magdaleno, who has identified quite precisely what this text is about. And so it's a letter which might be dated to 945, 929 to the Byzantine emperor. And so this reminds us, of course, of this very famous history of a Greek manuscript of Dioscorides sent to the court of Cordoba by the Roman emperor. And the whole thing about the ambassador as informants between different courts, and also the fact that nice herb books were used as gifts in these embassies. And continuing, I consider the illustrations as pieces of information which are relevant. And so the most ancient trace illustration of Oriental drugs is here in the famous omega-75 Dioscorides at Mount Athos. We have here the nardos. And what is interesting is that nardos, which I've circled in red, doesn't look like at all like that. This is Nardos, you see the flower. You see here a herbarium specimen, and the drug on the image on the left is the part at the very bottom, which is a bunch of rootlets between the upper part of the plant and the real root. And so you see this is the trunk, which has been represented in the manuscript as a smaller conifer. Also here we have a cinnamon, and you'll see that it's similar, I do believe, to the image in the earliest paper manuscript of Dioscurides preserved at the University of Leiden, 1081. And we have also Moschos. You see the animal there in the rectangle, and we have the name Moschos, which is not a veal, but this is the Greek term Moschos, which has been used as a transcription of Arabic musk. And so that's a very good finding. And so here you see the deer musk in the Himalaya. In conclusion, so Barbara, we are fine, I hope. What we do is increasing the number of manuscripts, and we return to the cut which has been introduced in the Greek medical literature by Niccolao Leoniceno, who in 1492 published this book, which has no title, but the beginning of the text is on the mistakes of Pliny and many other people in medicine. And with this book, Leoniceno simply erased all the production between the classics, the end of the classics, Galen, and 1453. And so with the work we are doing, we are re-injecting all the works which were published, written actually, between, let's say, Galen and 1453, which completely changes the picture of the history of medicine. And you have seen from my numbers that it doubles the number of manuscripts. And this is where I come with the food. We have in this text lots of text about food and beverages. We have also iatromagic, because I consider that this is medicine. We have lots of text also about substitution. This is for our previous speaker. We have also smell and taste. So this is something that we have been talking about. The qualities of the food. And I also do consider the diagrams, the diagrammatic representation of notions in the text. So not only do we expand the number of manuscripts, but we also expand the field of the history of medicine. So in very short, I have summarized 50 years of active research. And so many thanks for your attention.
That's a great service to mankind, Alain. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just one question. How many palimpsests are there in medical text? I used the Weissenberg 64 for De Alimentorum, and I just wonder how many palimpsests like that are there?
Thank you for the question and your compliment, John. There aren't that many. There is an article by Halfinger, which has been published maybe 2011 or 12, something like that. And there is a dozen, not that many.
Thank you.
Yes, maybe I can add to this, because I've very recently was in Vatican Library and studied there a palimpsest with a bunch of ointment recipes. And I also read this article by Halfinger 2012. And it mentions about 13 or 15 palimpsests with medical content.
Thank you.
I might have missed this, but among the texts that would go into such a catalog, would you include papyri, or is this going to be something completely separate? Like, how broad does this go?
No papyri and no Iatrisophia. Okay. Let's say we need to limit ourselves. And let's say papyri are something different. And we made a cut at the end of the 16th century. Not that we don't want to consider the Iatrisophia, because I have made the inventory of the Iatrisophia, but not in that specific research program.
And then in terms of content, do you include things like Morepsos? Like, do you include these kinds of ointment books, and are there other ones?
Of course, yes.
So and then are there other later examples that are Well, and maybe we talk about that because I'd be very curious to see if there's later examples of ointment compilations, like parallel to what we find in the Arabic tradition.
Yeah. Yes. I should show you my table 25 manuscripts, and so yes. But bottom line, yes, we take anything and everything that has to do with the management of health and bodily hygiene, of course, and also health is also the mind. The body and the mind. And so iatromagic, we've decided to take them because it's about psychology, let's say, if you want in a certain sense. It's about health. And so that's what I have said in conclusion. We expand the number of manuscripts, of course, that's obvious, but also we expand the concept, the very concept of medicine, taking anything and everything that is related to, let's say, the well-being of the human person.
A question for Isabel. Thank you, Isabel, a lot for this. Could you please elaborate a bit on the association of Loganakis with the manuscript? Because she's a fascinating figure. Of course, only if you are in the position to do so.
Yes, he's absolutely a fascinating person, and I've studied a little bit in the context of my really large study on iatromagy in Byzantine times. I've studied a little bit these things about the miraculous salt mixtures, and there I came over Konstantinos Rhodokanakis with his Alexikakos. And this is a iatrochemical mixture based on salt, but with a lot of more ingredients, which he does not tell. We do not know. And I think after finding this ex libris, this was really a surprise, and I was quite happy having found this. I think that this manual, this collection, because it contains a lot of therapeutical items, ointments, poultices, pills, and it's really focused on this external therapy, because the pills are very less compared to the external, to the plasters, to the ointments. So I think this might be a tradition which might have interested one member. I'm very careful now, one member of the Rhodokanakis family, which might have been in contact with this manuscript, because this manuscript originally, and this is what I've forgotten to tell you, because all the illustrations, it does not originally date into middle of 17th century, because if we consider that Johannes, that one of the Pioropoulos brothers would be the template, we are in the around the start or middle of 15th century. So this is a later tradition which might be opposed by one of the Rhodokanakis family.
On that same question, the printed book that you illustrated by Rhodokanakis, he worked in London. It was published in London anyway.
Yes, you can find this in the, and this is very very funny, because you have this printed page, and there you can find in the lower part text in English and Greek, mixing both languages, that he was an alchemist employed by King Charles II, and he has his lab quite close to the residence, and he was working in this lab, and he was developing there all parts of these alchemical, iatrochemical things. And so he was as I've understood this passage, he was in constant contact with his employer, and so he was working in London in close contact with the king, and he was developing some remedies for him.
Thank you very much. Well, a quick question for Alain, if I may. Another specific book, the first manuscript that you gave an example of as you having deleted was a copy of a printed book. I'd just love to know, because I know about that book a bit, and I would love to know how there came about a complete written copy of it. Where is it? Could you remind me?
Let's say it's the manuscript of Brussels. Longueuil. Let's say it's Longueuil.
De Avibus published by Gymnicus and Cologne.
Yes, correct. Yes, it's the Longueuil, which has been translated into Latin, Longivillus or something like that. But let's say, and this manuscript is digitized, by the way. I have asked the library, Bibliothèque Royale in Brussels, to digitize it for me for these 15 lines. I didn't know that it was a copy of a printed book, and so I am some sort of ashamed to have time to do that. But nevertheless, we have it in digital format now, and so I don't remember. It's 487. 58, 2 in Roman numerals, 458, the number of the manuscript.
Thank you.
But you have it in digital.
So thank you to both speakers for engaging presentations on really important and diverse topics that actually complement very well. So thank you again.
So thank you.